Certain and Uncertain. Chapter 47. Duped. Alan's idea of tracking Max by the plumber's badge was a good idea, but he needed to stop second-guessing himself, and he needed to realize that he had to outthink an enemy, and using their own tactics against them was a good way to do it. But Jen was a step ahead of them as she clicked the door closed behind Pierce with the controller in her pocket. It was kind of fun messing with them like this. Definitely cathartic, and that was probably something she was going to have to talk to Camille about later, but for now, she had a role to play. "Looking for this?" she asked, holding up Max's badge. She smiled wickedly as Pierce looked at her cautiously. He stowed his own badge. A good move. He'd need both hands free to fight her. The crackling lights were caused by a device in her pocket, too. It was more for effect than anything else, but it was fun. Jen shifted to Goop and attacked. Pierce evaded and landed a few feet away, looking conflicted. "Whatever's controlling you, Jen, you need to fight it." So, Pierce wasn't buying into Manny's theory that Ethan's death had driven her over the edge. Jen could play with that. It was mean, but that was kind of the point of playing the villain. She staggered as if confused and saw hope blossom in Pierce's eyes. "Help me, Pierce. I can't control myself. You're my only hope." The hope in Pierce's eyes turned to determination. Couldn't have that. Jen was supposed to be the big bad guy, but he fell for it hook, line, and sinker, lowering his fighting stance and stepping far too close to an enemy combatant. "How can I help?" She spat a glob of goop into his face, and he staggered backwards, trying to pull it off as she laughed, as insanely as she could. He pulled his face free. "How can I help?" She mocked, and laughed again, spinning around him, covering him with goop, cutting off his air supply. She wouldn't hurt him. Not really. She'd been given full permission to knock the team around until unconsciousness, but no farther. Not that she would have gone farther. But Pierce proved a bit more resourceful than she was counting on. He used one of his spikes, fired from an elbow, to knock Goop's gravitational device out of range. Jen splattered to the floor and grumbled as the device returned to her, and Pierce took off up a structure. His mistake, though. She melted through the bolts, holding it up. "Timber!" she called out as the structure tumbled to the floor. Pierce leapt free at the last second and rolled to his feet, taking off at a run down the hall away from Jen. She transformed back to herself with a flash of light and laughed after him. "You can run, but you can't hide." She'd let him sweat for a while. She had 3 other plumber's kids to torment. The earpiece in her ear beeped to life as she slipped into one of the hidden hatches. "You might be enjoying this a little too much, kiddo." She rolled her eyes as she made her way to the opposite side of the station. "You told me to make it realistic. Every bad guy I've ever gone up against enjoys the fight just a little too much. Vilgax, Animo, come on. I'm just going with the examples I've seen." She could practically hear Grandpa Max rolling his eyes. "All right, just be careful. We don't want any of you actually getting hurt." She nodded and clicked the earpiece off again as she activated a door, sending Manny the wrong way after Helen. Using Wrath again felt a little bittersweet. But fighting Manny was fun. He always had something to prove, and had wanted to fight her since they'd met to do just that. She was a little concerned about the amount of damage they'd managed to do in the room, but it was still nice to fight someone who could keep up with her for the most part. Then he had to go and push the wrong button. "Just 'cause you can't handle what happened to Ethan." She roared over the end of his sentence and got down to some serious butt-kicking, both literally and figuratively. She roared at him again as he passed out. She transformed back into herself and left quickly, lest she do more damage to the Tetramand. Pierce joined back up with Helen as she managed to rouse Manny. Pierce was finally taking charge, but now she had to deal with Alan. This one she wasn't looking forward to. Alan was a sweet kid who'd already been through a lot. Jen had never gotten to pay back Manny or Helen for kidnapping Kevin the first time they had met, or actually fight Pierce without having to throw the fight to get what she wanted. Those fights had been easier. Alan, though, he'd never done anything to warrant a butt-kicking. But it had to be done, so she snuck up on him in the hydroponics lab. She'd always been really good at walking silently. Silent as a ghost, ever since getting Ghost Freak back anyway. He nearly shrieked as he came nose to nose with her. She wasn't even transformed yet. But honestly, the boy had some serious confidence issues. Jen, he stumbled backwards as she stepped forward, slowly, purposefully. Where are the others, Alan? A sort of test of her own. In a single question, scared though he was, intimidated and outmatched, he needed to be able to hold under pressure and not give up his team, no matter what. I'm not sure. A decent answer, though the truth. He could have lied, sent her on a wild goose chase after his more confident teammates, but he didn't. Scared though he was, he made no move to betray his friends. That's too bad, she said, meaning the opposite. She twirled the dial on the Omnitrix. You should have stuck with them. Actual solid advice. As she went big chill and attacked. When they all worked together to corner her, she grinned and realized her mistake immediately. A cornered bad guy didn't grin. But she was still big chill and had an advantage. She cackled for effect and sank through the floor. They were doing better than she'd given them credit for. She made her way to the bridge and sat in the chair, waiting. Sure, they wouldn't be able to see her from the doorway. Chapter 48. Call of Duty. Getting jettisoned into space had not been part of Jen's plan, though going straight up Jurassic Park on the Max Force was probably a little out of line. She hadn't even really hurt them, though. But she wasn't going to last out here long as Humongosaur, so she twirled the dial on her chest and slapped it, transforming into Big Chill. The interesting thing about Necrophrygians was that they didn't actually need to breathe, and the cold actually made them stronger. So out here in space, she was at her strongest right now. She soared through the void and back into the station, taking note that it was listing a bit close to the planet. They should probably be worried about that. She was right, but Grandpa Max was able to easily right the orbit with the backup thrusters. I can't believe you guys jettisoned me into space, she shouted as she entered the room back to her normal form, shivering like a leaf in a hurricane. Just because Big Chill couldn't feel the cold didn't mean she hadn't gotten a taste of the void as Humongosaur. She glared at them and watched them tense. She grinned. I have never been prouder of you. They stared at her like she'd gone completely crazy. Max laughed as he righted the orbit of the station and pulled a blanket from a hidden compartment. He tossed it to her and she wrapped herself in it and felt it automatically heat up. She shivered and burrowed further into the blanket. Manny was the first to actually find his voice. What the hell is happening here? Pierce stared at her. This was some kind of test. Jen nodded at the sharp teen. Got it in one. This isn't a storage satellite. It's a training base. She looked over at Max as Helen huffed indignantly. So, this was all fake. Max sighed. The Jen going crazy and attacking me, that was a test. The satellite nearly crashing into London was not. Jen shrugged as Max shot her a look. You told me not to hold back. Alan blinked at them. But why? Max grinned. You four are up for an evaluative promotion, based on your field experience and excellent progress at the academy and on the field. He glanced at Pierce here. Jen grinned at them from her blanket cocoon. Pierce raised a hand. So, this was the Kobayashi Maru, no-win situation we had to work out? Jen shrugged at them. Sort of. The gist of it was to see how you'd handle a more experienced, stronger opponent. Someone you considered a friend and didn't want to hurt who really wanted to hurt you. So, do I make a convincing bad guy? Helen broke out into laughter. Manny grumbled. Pierce pinched the bridge of his nose. But Alan nodded. Yes. Please don't ever go evil. That was terrifying. Jen laughed. Just a single bark of laughter, but the first real, genuine laugh she'd managed in over 2 weeks. Max smiled. But like I said, only Jen attacking was the test. What you four were willing to do to stop the satellite from crashing and killing millions, that was your choice and not part of the simulation. You went above and beyond the call of duty and proved yourselves today.
Congratulations, trainees.
Helen squealed in excitement. Manny picked her up and twirled her through the air, laughing loudly as Alan punched the air. Up until that moment, they had been cadets, the lowest rank of new plumbers. The ranking was simple. When recruited to the plumbers and heading off to the academy or being trained on the ground, a being was considered a cadet. The next level up was a trainee. They could take monitor duty and were sometimes selected for ride-alongs with more minor missions. New graduates of the academy were the next step up, usually called rookies. Then, of course, you had agents, fully fledged, tried and tested plumbers. Then the magisters. Then at the very top was the magistrata. Outside the ranks sat people like Jen, rare though they were, considered specialists in their fields by the plumbers. Technically, there were a few other specialists out there in the universe, Ultimos and his team, but they were strictly bound by the Galactic Enforcers Code, and Jen had heard that Vilgax had defeated Ultimos and drained his power. One of the 10 heroes he'd done that to before trying to do the same to her. She shook herself. She really didn't need to think about someone else who'd died, or at least most likely died. Max turned to Pierce.
I'll accept you.
All celebrations stopped as Pierce's face fell. She could tell he was wondering if running from his fight with Jen instead of getting beaten like the others had gotten him enough deductions to be left behind. Jen, though, knew otherwise.
You have more field experience than the others, and more time on the ground in the null void. Considering all that, you've been promoted to a rookie and are being stationed at the new base in Bellwood.
Helen cheered and hugged her brother, nearly tackling him to the ground. He let out a disbelieving laugh. Kevin and Gwen picked them up about 10 minutes later in the spaceship they'd been given by the Luodans. Kevin raised an eyebrow at Jen's blanket. They threw me out into space. He snorted a laugh and applauded as the Max Force entered the ship. Alan frowned as Manny laughed. The Pyronite sat down next to Jen, who kept close to his flames as Gwen nodded. That is one way to do that. Pierce and Helen were just glad no one was angry at them for doing that. They made their way back to Earth, where Cooper was waiting to hear how the mission had gone. He was helping to upgrade the labs at the new Bellwood base and would be sticking around for quite some time. The 2 Galvin techs who transferred from the Mount Rushmore base, Bluekish and Dreba, absolutely adored the technopath. Mrs. Daniels, Cooper's mom, insisted on throwing a small party for the Max Force to celebrate their promotions. Jen stuck to the back, barely touching the cake she'd been given and slipping out as soon as she was sure she wouldn't be noticed. She wasn't expecting what she found when she got home. Grandpa Max was sitting in the living room with a woman she'd never seen before. He was calming her down with a cup of tea. She looked vaguely familiar, but Jen couldn't place why. She quietly closed the door behind her. The whole place was trashed when I got home, I think. Oh... She had spotted Jen in the doorway. Grandpa Max looked up and nodded to Jen to take a seat. She did so.
It's okay, Moira. This is Jen, my granddaughter. Jen, this is Moira Levin.
Jen's eyes went wide. Levin? She asked quietly, realizing why the woman looked so familiar. The dark eyes staring into the teacup in front of her were the same ones that had laughed at Jen not 2 hours earlier. The same ones that glanced lovingly at Gwen when he thought no one was looking. She was now face to face with Kevin's mom.